Hey guys, it's Sajan again, and I have a new video about RTA and how we should approach team building, or what monsters should be in our RTA monster box when we first start RTA, or for returning players like me, like when you delve into the RTA world, how should you approach it? And typically, a common piece of advice that I've heard myself and that I hear from a lot of players is that you should build teams instead of individual monsters. And that way you have this kind of synergy that you can go into an RTA battle with. So like you have kind of like an action plan in place for every RTA. You have these 5 monsters or 6 monsters or 7 monsters that you choose from. And that's how you kind of get your feet wet. And as you dip your toes into the pool that is RTA. Well, one of the problems I have with that concept is it's rather time consuming and resource intensive sometimes to build up a team. And a lot of people that play this game, and a lot of people that play a lot of games, is there's a completionist mindset that you can't start RTA until that team you're working on is perfect and ready to go. So you might find yourself, firstly having to summon these monsters that are going to be in your team, and then you need to Devilmon all of them, and then you need to find artifacts for them, and you need to have the best runes possible in the world for them. And you find yourself like 4, 6, 7 months out from the idea of the team to the completion of the team. And that's when you could say to yourself, well, I can start RTAing now. But what happens then is that, number one, you don't have the experience with the team to play it well. You denied yourself months of time learning how to play RTA, which heavily is skewed to being good at the pick ban phase, where most of the matches are won and lost. So when you take your team that you invested all your time, hundreds of dollars possibly summoning for, and just farming, you start to realize, oh, like maybe this team isn't exactly what I thought it would be. Maybe this team doesn't fit my playstyle, and you are losing over and over again to teams that might seem inferior, to people that are lower ranked than you, and you're getting discouraged. And that's what I think the biggest problem with is that when teams are created and strategies are put into action from months ago or for who knows how long ago, and you get into RTA and it is daunting and it is hard to pick up quickly and you lose a lot, you get discouraged and you want to stop RTAing. So what I think a better approach is, first I have to say, if the first approach works for you, if you build great teams and they're working out for you, that's fantastic. But what I think a different approach is that doesn't come with the same expectations and that cliff right into disappointment is, instead of building teams, we build counter units. And what I think this allows us to do is to approach RTA with a little bit more of a fun mindset. A mindset that is like, I'm really learning. Not that I want to prove my monsters are better than yours. I'm not here to prove that my strategy and my intelligence is superior to yours. The concept that we go into RTA is, I want to learn how to be better in the pick ban phase. I want to be better at picking the correct units for this situation. And I want to get better at when to use skills in the match itself. So I'm showing you on the screen now what I think a lot of people's monster box should look like when they first get into RTA. And it could be maybe something you have to work up to, and you can use this as simple as like a guide on what are decent counter units in RTA to make and invest some time in. Or you can look at this and like, okay, let me refresh my monster box by removing all the other monsters I used before, and firstly selecting only the units that look like these, or that counter strategies, units, and compositions in RTA. So let's take a look at what we have here. We have Lulu, we have Rigel, Cyan, Josephine, Tetra, Hagang, Chloe, Verd, Rika, Tessarion, Juno, Antares, Kaki, Jogun, Leo, Triana. We have Ayunu, Carbine, Diana, and Molly. Now, some of these monsters are Nat 5 monsters, but the game is 7 years old. I expect people to have a decent number of monsters that are considered maybe premium. Back in my day when I started playing like 6 years ago, the idea of having a bunch of nat 5s was very foreign. But when I've come back to the game after all these years, I've come to realize that the ability for people to summon has been multiple in factors difference in the positive compared to the ability for us to summon like 5 years ago, where the events were very stingy. There wasn't all these great efficient quote unquote packs in the store. So I don't want to offend if you don't have certain nat 5 monsters, but some of these monsters are integral in competing with RTA. Like, you can get good at RTA by pure rune quality or just really good decision making without certain monsters. But if you have these monsters, consider them usable and counter units to a lot of compositions and strategies that you'll be facing in RTA. So that's my mindset when saying, let's make a counter monster box first instead of creating teams and compositions. Because what I think is going to happen is when you can only pick from maybe, one or two of your regular monsters and 2 or 3, 4 counter picks, is that you get to kind of play around with the idea of like, okay, this monster performs well in this situation, and then it gets ingrained in your memory. So when you're picking in the future, it's just automatic. Okay, they have this unit, I'm picking this unit to counter it. They have these 2 units, this is my second pick. So I can prepare myself to pick counter picks. There's a lot of different kind of like strategies you can develop for yourself if you just kind of tunnel vision your first couple of weeks of RTA into just counter picks. Now, of course, you can't make a full team out of counter picks, and you're going to have 100 other monsters that you can pick that could be like mainstays to a team, just generally good monsters. Typically, these monsters are going to be HP leads or speed leads that can complement your team. But let's just focus on picks that you have that are counter picks. And there are picks that are probably not in my monster boxes. I don't have them that will work really great. I will later mention some monsters that can probably be better counter picks, but I don't want to be so offensive to start naming a bunch of light and dark monsters from the get-go. But so how do we pick counter picks? Like, so when you're getting into an RTA match, you're going to see your opponent's picks evolve into a typical strategy. They've probably been RTAing longer than you have. If you're watching this video, you might have any RTA under your belt, or you are just so discouraged by RTA, you're just looking for a different way to experience it. And I think this is a healthy way to experience RTA. So what kind of strategies do players' picks involved in? I think there's overarching archetypes, right? And the first type we want to talk about is the CC type. Now, what does a CC type look like? Well, it's probably going to involve like a speed lead. Maybe they have, let's say, maybe they have a Chiwu, and this Chiwu would be their speed lead. And like, how do they control you? Well, maybe they have, how about a Poseidon? They have maybe a Chungpong. These 2 units to control your attack bar, and so you never take a turn. And so, what do you do when you face a bunch of units that is designed to keep you from moving? Like, they don't want you to have a chance to go. And if you do go, it can be really devastating for them because they might be kind of squishy, fast units. Well, there's a couple different ways to do it. And it really depends on, what they're picking. But some universal answers to that is like monsters that just can't be really stunned. I think Rigel is a good answer to that, where it has immunity to inability effects, or you have the way to sustain through CC with like a Josephine. Josephine can be a way to just trying to live out a bunch of CC in hopes that you get to go. Another option would be units that just let you take turns randomly, like the Antares. Antares gives you a small chance to proc a turn whenever an opponent takes a turn. And there is, you can put it on like Despair and have the potential to stun a unit or the entire team. It gives you a chance to go in the first place. So like, what would you do? Let's say someone did pick Chiwu, someone did pick Poseidon, and someone picked Trident, all these CC monsters. Like, how would your counter team look like? Well, it could really simply just look like 3 of the counters I told you right now. Maybe you pick Rigel, Antares, Josephine. Maybe you pick a Verd. Maybe you pick a Molly. Like, the goal here is not necessarily to win. You want to win, but the goal is to learn how the units that you're picking interact as counters, how your units can disable entire strategies by just the experience of using them over and over again. So you know what to expect when they're in your team. Because one of the things when you start building teams for RTA is when you get into the pick ban phase, let's say you are a bruiser team and you have, I don't have this, but if you have Cardinal, Mulong, Lulu, let's say you have these units and you're like, okay, I'm going to go in and pick that. Then you start to realize, okay, you pick Cardinal as your number one pick. Well, what happens then? The opponent picks Mulong and Lulu. You're like, oh, well, I just built up all these units and he took 2 of my picks. What do you do then? Right? So this team building and team picking is just simply just to learn. So just kind of have fun with the picks, but with the overall idea is like, okay, I'm going to pick a bunch of units that I think are going to counter you. How does that work out in the real world? Well, I think you'll lose some of the time. You probably lose half the time. You probably win half the time because hard counters to strategies really makes matches end pretty quickly. Either you lose really fast or they lose pretty fast or they just give up once they realize it's not working. So after CC teams, like what's another team that you'll face a lot of, especially in lower ranks and fighter ranks especially? I think it's going to be cleave teams. Like they might cleave you with some type of Bastet composition. So they might first pick Bastet and they might then pick Kaki. They might pick even just Lucian. Just your typical AoE damage dealing units. Like, so you probably know they're going to probably hit you really hard. So what is the concept to win out against a cleave team? Well, you can either keep them from going, which is kind of difficult because they might have much faster runes than you. They probably will bring a speed lead, and they will have the attack bar booster of Bastet to bring their old team up to speed and go before you ever take a chance to. So you can almost guarantee when you're going against a cleave team, like, okay, I'm going to get against a cleave team. They are going to kill me. But not all units die just because they get killed for the first time. And specifically, Ayunu is a great counter to a lot of these teams where you might face, like nowadays, like with a recent patch that came out in November 2021, you'll probably face Tianas, Alicias are strong. And of course, Lucians are strong still and always will be. So Ayunu has the ability to resurrect itself and do damage when it dies, and then actually have another turn and do more damage thereafter. So it's very possible that if you were to get cleaved and your Ayunu gets through the pick ban phase, you can kill 2 monsters by just dying. That's a great possibility. And well, another possibility to get around cleaves is to have have a Cian. So Cian can die as well, and then get invincibility and get immunity. So if Cian didn't have a chance to use his second ability yet, and most likely if you died, you didn't get a chance to use skill 2, which is your AoE bomb. Let's say Illusion cleaves you, you get killed, most likely pretty easily. Like, what are we rocking here? Probably, I have no hit points. I have 15,000 hit points. I can probably die to 1 Lucian card, and Lucian shoots 3 cards, of course. And when I get resurrected after dying, I just throw a bunch of bombs on them, and they are typically really squishy, and they will die rather quickly. Not to mention, this has additional accuracy and skill too. You see in the skill description, so the rune requirements for CN are pretty low. But those are some self-reviving monsters are a really great way to counter cleave teams, AoE cleave teams. What are some other options that are maybe more premium in that respect? Perna has just been buffed. Perna has the ability to strip on skill 2, and it, of course, self-revives. Another option is just to resurrect things just generally. And I think the Wind Druid is a good answer to that and has the ability to do good damage. It can provoke. It can buff defense. So if you have those units, those are other ways to survive cleaves. I mentioned earlier in the video, there are some premium ways to stop cleaves. and one of them being, of course, the overall counter to everything in the world, Tian Lang. So if they were to use some type of attack bar boosting monster, like very prevalently the Bastet, Tian Lang could cut in really easily and strip and or stun the whole entire team with its skill 3, where any monster that uses an attack bar increasing skill has that effectiveness reduced by 50%, and then thusly his attack bar is increased by 15%. So those are some options when it comes to cleaves, a very popular type of composition that you'll be facing. Another way to get around cleaves is going to be nemesis traps. Basically healers that have full nemesis runes, or sometimes just, double nemesis and a will set. But with Chloe having speed lead now, I think she's the best option for you, because she can provide invincibility and immunity when she has a chance to take a turn, and she has a speed lead that makes your monsters a little bit faster to give you a chance to cut in better when you take damage with your nemesis runes. So I think a Chloe trap is a really excellent way also to stop a cleave. And let's talk about compositions that are based around elemental types. And so, if you have, if the person you're going up against has like 2 or 3 monsters out of 4 that are like wind, I mean, you simply just pick the counter, like the element they're weak to. So if they have 3 wind monsters, really solid picks. Just generally, when you're trying to learn through counter picks, you're just picking any of your fire monsters, like Antares, Kaki, and same goes for water and fire. If they have a lot of water, Diana is the obvious pick if you have Diana, but even your Ayunu, your Carbine can be very good as well. I put Triana here just in case you go against any like one-shot teams. So Triana can save a person getting one shot if it's like a one-shot cleave team, like a Shimite, for instance. But also a good wind unit against water. And if they have fire, I mean, obviously, any of your water counter units are really good as well. So when you're going up against teams that are really favoring an element, just pick a bunch of your counter picks that are just counter to that and see how it works out. What about teams that have kind of weaknesses in their composition? And the biggest weaknesses in the composition is when a team doesn't have immunity. Like one of the more popular immunity picks right now, I would say, is going to be Wusa. So Wusa is probably going to be in like every other match you ever fight against if you're like Conqueror 1 or up, most likely. But let's say they only bring 1 immunity. Like if they only have 1 source of immunity, and that source is going to be Wusa. Well, if you ban out Wusa, you can bring any of your AoE monsters that really mess up things really well that don't have immunity, which like your bombers. Like, of course, a Cian would be really, really good for that. But more universally, Rika has a lot more flexibility in terms of, has the ability to turn cycle herself, AoE dots, AoE stun. So if you have the ability to ban out one of their monsters, you should pick like 2, if they have the ability to, if you can ban out their one and only immunity, or if they bring no immunity at all, kind of consider these 2 AoE units as strong counters to that team. Because if they ban out one of them, well, you're going to go through with the other. And you can see how to punish teams that are poorly picked in the pick ban stage. Like that's one of the strategies you need to kind of observe as you progress through RTA. You need to look at, okay, this guy's picking really poorly, and you need to leverage that for a win. You need to make them pay for poor picks. Like you can't just go into an RTA match and just pick all the good stuff that you have and think they're going to synergize. You see it a lot, obviously. Or that they had this kind of strategy in mind, but you pick something away from them and now they can't do anything about it. Well, yeah, that's how you have to punish people. And the most common problem is no immunity, no cleansing, and things like that. So have a Rika ready, have your Cian ready for those types of situations. Another type of composition you might come across are any type of like debuff teams, like the aforementioned Rika, or if you happen to unfortunately fight a Nephthys, which is the dark desert queen who has unresistible AoE debuff. like how do you handle teams that you know are going to put a lot of debuffs on you? Well, I think the obvious answer here is Juno, one of the strongest units in RTA. If you don't have this unit, this should be one of the units you really try to go for in sense of like SWC scrolls, anniversary scrolls, summoning stones. This is a great monster. It is almost entirely a must. And it has the strong potential to really solo hard these teams that are debuff based. Another option for you as well would be Tetra. Tetra has a skill that reduces harmful effects, which is really key in a lot of teams to survive, let's say, bomb teams and debuff teams from a couple seasons ago in RTA. So she's not as relevant anymore, but for the purposes of learning RTA, I think Tetra should be built, and Juno, if you have Juno. Especially if you don't have Juno, you need to build Tetra, and that would be a great answer to those kind of debuffing teams. Another team that you're going to come across is just generally AoE teams. Like, so AoE can exist as a cleave, it can exist as CC, it can just exist as these monsters just happen to do AoE, like maybe Carnal with a turn 3 like AoE speed debuff stun. So what are your options here to stop AoE? The universal answer is a Verd. Verd can be picked in almost any team because even if they don't have the ability to AoE, you can just boost your whole team's attack bar just like you do in dungeons. But if you ruin this Verd triple revenge, you can have almost 40%, like 37 point something percent chance to revenge and thus increase the attack bar of your entire team. This can really mess up and cut in teams that are even really finely tuned, like against I would say against teams like Chung Peng. Verd is a must pick. You have to pick against these AoE type of monsters, or even monsters that just kind of casually AoE. Verd is always going to be a really strong pick, and like I mentioned just a couple seconds ago, it could be a pick in almost any of your teams. Like if you're making teams just based off counters, you can always just pick like Verd, like pick one, just to see how it operates, to see how your opponent's picks evolve from an early pick Verd, or you pick Verd last as a typical counter pick. So make sure you have a Verd ruined all revenge and tanky as possible, a lot of speed. I've seen some Verds be very offensive, but we don't want to be necessarily too offensive right now. We don't want to be the ones necessarily defining the strategy. We want to go into RTA matches simply to learn how counters work, how our counters work in different team compositions and against compositions that are designed for. So, you might see people have really fast Swift Verds, but we want a Revenge Verd for those AoE teams. Okay, what's another type of composition that you probably go up against? Speed teams. Speed teams that meaning, well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of speed teams because monsters are mostly fast in RTA. But what I mean is monsters that require speed to be more effective. Okay, they need to have like a speed buff or have a lot of speed just to do a lot of damage. And some of those monsters are going to be Miles. Miles requires a lot of speed to do damage. He does damage proportionate to his speed as ignorable defense damage. And any of the Beast Riders. I mean, Beast Riders are very susceptible to things that limit speed. And the one thing that limits speed is your Leo. So Leo, if you don't have it, this is like a Juno situation. You must try to get a Leo. And the great thing about Leo is its rune requirements are rather low in the sense that you don't have to have any speed on it at all. But ironically, in the upper echelons of RTA, Leos need to have a lot of stats to survive and do damage. But just for learning's sake, you can rune Leo in any type of violent way you want. Whatever runes you have, just use them. So what what do you build with Leo though? I mean, it's a foregone conclusion. Like if you are using Leo, Verd makes sense because you can't get an advantage with speed with Leo. So having these two units, Leo and Verd together, they are a perfect counter pick to the speed-based teams that you might be going against. Or if you just don't want to play speed and your monsters are slower, you can just pick your Leo. Like if you're getting outsped, because it can really play with people's timings when it comes to, like, let's say their best stat. or the ability to like two-shot a Lucian right off the bat with good crits can be really effective too against cleaves. So try to get a Leo. Really, really important. What about strippers? Like, what about units that are going to go first? They're going to strip, and they're going to leave you completely exposed. Of course, since most strippers are AoE, all those AoE strippers, the Verge can be great. Your Chloe pick can be really good too because it has a speed lead. But also, if you have the Heigang has the ability to really put strippers like Gianna in her place because of the passive, where when you do get stripped, attack bar gets boosted. That's really, of course, effective against Chiwu, Trident, your typical strippers. So if you are seeing how they're let's say they start off with a Chiwu, you can just go right into your counters, your AoE counters. Like if their first pick is Chiwu, I would just be like, okay, I want to do Heigang, I want to do Chloe, I want to do Verd, I want to do whatever to answer the rest of their team. But like I said, the concept again is just to learn your counter picks, to play with your counters as much as possible, get comfortable with them, learn how to tweak their runes when they're not really doing well in one particular area. Maybe they're a little too slow, maybe they need to be a little bit faster, maybe they need to be more tanky to survive an AoE, to survive a cleave. Those are the things that we're trying to learn. RTA is now actually just RTA school. It's not me trying to get the most wins and rank up as much as possible. Let's spend as long as we need to in fighter ranks or C1 and just learn the concepts of the enemies you fight and your own monsters that you have. And we have like a Jogun that I haven't talked about yet. But if you go against teams that center around passives is a huge problem, okay? Because some of the strongest monsters in the game are just completely passive driven. Jogun and Tessarion are going to be your friends. Jogun can seal away a monster like a Nana or a Molly, and without that monster on the field, the team most likely is going to fall apart very quickly without them. You can just Oblivion them with Tessarion. Tessarion is much stronger than he was when the game first came out, so take note of that. It is a rather effective unit. Like if you're going against a Tian Lang, if you're going against a Ragdoll, Tessarion can really shut them down, because I know it's crazy. Back in my day, the idea of seeing a Ragdoll in PvP, it was incredibly rare. I mean, impossible. But you'll see a lot of Ragdolls nowadays. I see a lot of Tian Langs in C1 and C2 nowadays. So if you can Oblivion their passives, kind of shut down the whole point of them being on the field, passive-based compositions can be really hurt by these two monsters. And of course, everyone can get Tessarion, but Jogun, if you can't get Jogun, and if you do get Jogun, a lot of people say he's not that great, but he's actually really, really good in this meta to deal with Nana, to deal with Molly, to deal with any of these passive-based teams. So that's a very popular composition. Like you might see kind of like a composition that I run sometimes is going to be like a Wind Druid, Molly, some type of HP lead like the Wind Monkey King, and like Wusa, right? And if Molly's off the field, the sustain is just limited to Wusa, and also you're going 3 versus 4, right? Because if Molly's not doing anything, Molly's main ability is just to heal every turn, and if that's not happening, I mean, she's just kind of useless other than the cleanse. So that's the last type of composition you might see, the passive-based compositions. So I hope this helps in kind of reframing how we approach RTA. Like if you're having a lot of problems with RTA, your monsters are not really working out, your team compositions are not working out. Like you've tried Sierra, Gianna, and your bunch of art masters, and you're realizing like, okay, I don't have the runes to pull this off, even though I work really hard on them. These are my best runes. They're not working. Let's flip the script, focus our monster box on learning the counters, learning how to pick them, where to pick them, how to ban the opponent's monsters to maximize your counters, your monster counters ability in the match itself. And I think it'll be a good stepping stone for people who are very new to RTA, because it doesn't come with much disappointment. Because if you lose picking Ayunu, Carbine, Antares, and Cian, I mean, if you lose with that team, I'm like, you can't feel bad. You can't feel bad about that. I think removing that expectation of winning allow you to progress much further than traditional recommendations as far as how to succeed at RTA. So if you are seeing threads on Reddit or some type of forum that said, here's a screenshot of my monster box, how do I get better at RTA? Can you show me a composition? What their monster box should look like is a bunch of counters. And if they want to pepper in some of their favorite monsters, like maybe they want to use, like, I don't know. Let's say they want to use, what's a good, like Fen Yang. Okay, you can use that as like your 1 damage dealer, Fen Yang, 3 counters. Let's say you want to use your favorite light and dark monster. You want to use Ragdoll. That's great. If you just, but the rest of the team, I really think should be your counter picks. See how they kind of teach you the game from, I think, the more healthy perspective. So, I mean, thanks for listening, guys. That's my spiel about monster comp on monster box composition in RTA. And I'll be coming back to you guys soon with another video, probably within a couple of days. So, thanks for listening.